One egg, one lie, and a murder hiding in plain sight. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Let's build this community of thinkers. Drop a comment with your city. Hearing from you brings these stories to life. Onward. It started with a fried egg. That, and a man who smelled like he'd shaved with turpentine and thought tact was something you paid the government. It was 9:15, and I was halfway through a second cup of coffee, reading the sports section, when Fritz poked his head into the office. His face was unusually tight around the eyes, his version of DEFCON 3. "A man is in the kitchen," he said, his voice clipped. "He insists on seeing Mr. Wolfe. He is eating the eggs. Now you have to understand, no one is in the kitchen." During breakfast, but Fritz and the aroma of perfection. You don't step into that sanctum unless you've got an engraved invitation, or you're suicidal. So this mystery man was already guilty of a mortal offense before I even looked up from the paper. I walked into the kitchen prepared to eject a lunatic. Instead, I found a tall, freckled man in a rumpled linen suit, seated at the kitchen table like he'd grown there overnight. He held a fork mid-air, one yolk-burst egg gone, another in progress, and looked at me with the bland confidence of someone who believes the world is his hotel lobby. "You're Goodwin," he said. "Archie. Seen your name in the Gazette. I apologize for the intrusion. Well, not entirely. I had to be sure the eggs were real." "Congratulations," I said. "They are. You'll be paying for them in cash or confession?" "I'll pay in something better." He pointed the fork like a conductor's baton. "A story about a lie that's never been told and a man who died without knowing it. I'm a patient guy, within federal limits, but this wasn't shaping up to be an ordinary Tuesday. Start walking," I told him. He didn't move. "He'll want to hear it." "Wolfe?" "Yes. Tell him it's about Leland Stamer and a fried egg at 8:45 on Tuesday. That's all he'll need." Now that name gave me a tingle. Leland Stamer. A media broker turned philanthropist, turned recluse, turned the subject of a half-dozen quiet scandals, none of which ever stuck. Last I heard he was holed up in Connecticut pretending to have moral clarity and a poodle. "Wolfe doesn't conduct interviews before 11, I said. The man wiped his mouth with Fritz's linen napkin. "Today he will, or he'll regret it." Well, that got filed in my top 10 opening lines. I decided to give Wolfe the benefit of being annoyed in person. I found him in the plant room, surrounded by orchids and silence, seated in his chair, with a glass of orange juice on the table and a book on 19th century French cuisine on his lap. "A gentleman is in the kitchen," I said. "Uninvited. He ate Fritz's eggs and says he has something you'll want to hear." Wolfe's eyelids didn't flicker. "About Leland Stamer," I added. "And a fried egg alibi." That did it. Wolfe blinked twice, his equivalent of a gasp, and set the book down. He closed his eyes as if calculating the weight of the decision. "Bring him to the office," he said, voice like tempered iron. "And Archie, no interruptions. You could have knocked me over with a souffle." By the time I got our breakfast bandit into Wolfe's office, he had the air of a man attending his own tribute dinner. He took the red chair, the one across from Wolfe's desk, and crossed one ankle over the other, like he was posing for a statue. Wolfe had just arrived from the plant rooms, plopped himself into his own throne like a bear settling in for a long winter, and was scowling in a way that would have made a less confident man self-combust. "Name," Wolfe said. "Lennox Vance," the man replied smoothly. "Yes, that Lennox Vance. If he expected recognition, he got none." Wolfe's left brow went up ever so slightly. A minor event, but for Wolfe, practically a parade. "You were in the papers," I supplied. "Tech strategist, consultant, something with streaming wars and digital rights. Built a company, sold it, vanished." "3 companies," Vance corrected me, "and I didn't vanish. I changed lanes, worked with Leland Stamer for 7 months last year. He's dead now, I'm not." You're not, Wolfe said. Is that material? It is, Vance said, because someone's trying to make it look like I should be. That earned a pause. Wolfe didn't pounce on claims. He examined them the way a surgeon examines an X-ray, not to be impressed but to locate a fracture. Explain, Wolfe said. Vance reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded page torn from what looked like a cheap notebook. He placed it on Wolfe's desk without fanfare. Wolfe didn't touch it, neither did I. That's how we do things. First the story, then the props. That note was left on my doorstep yesterday, Vance said. No envelope, just that and a single fried egg. Perfectly cooked, still warm. Wolfe glanced at the page. So did I. It read, "You weren't at breakfast, but you said you were." There was no signature, no handwriting flourish, no cute embellishments. Just 10 words and a culinary prop that would have put Fritz's blood pressure in the danger zone. Wolfe leaned back. "And what were you supposed to be at breakfast for?" Leland Stamer, Vance said. "The Tuesday before he died, we'd had a falling out, minor or so I thought. But that morning he was supposed to meet with me and 2 others at his estate for a strategy session over breakfast. 8:45, I told people I was there. I wasn't. Why lie, I asked. Because I was at my ex-girlfriend's place, he said flatly. Not a great look for an ethics consultant. I didn't want the gossip. But now it's a problem." "How did Stamer die?" Wolfe asked. "Officially? Heart failure, natural causes, but there were rumors." Vance's voice dropped a notch. He was healthy, eccentric, secretive. His lawyer hinted there might be a will alteration pending. And 2 days before he died, he started claiming someone had tampered with his food. Now that turned Wolfe's scowl into something more concentrated. The man may abhor motion, mess, and uninvited guests, but suggest culinary sabotage, and he becomes a philosopher of poison. "And now someone knows you weren't where you claimed to be," Wolfe murmured. "Exactly. The egg is a message. It means someone else knew who was at that breakfast and who wasn't." I looked at Wolfe. He hadn't moved a muscle beyond his lips. He was running the logic quietly, invisibly, like a submarine sonar. "And what do you want from me, Mr. Vance?" Wolfe asked. "Clarity," Vance said. "I need to know who sent that note, who knew. I can't go to the police. They dig up everything, the lie, the affair, my work with Leland. But you find out things, without blowing up the world." Wolfe closed his eyes, which is how he sometimes chooses to look directly at you. "You came into my house. You ate in my kitchen. You have lied, you are lying, or you are about to lie. Still, you interest me. I'll take the case. For $35,000. Vance didn't blink. "Done. Pay Archie a retainer of $10,000 before you leave this room." Vance reached into his inner coat and pulled out a slim checkbook. He signed the check with a flourish that made my inner IRS auditor twitch with anticipation. I walked it over to the safe, tucked it in, and returned to my chair. Wolfe finally gestured to the note. "You'll leave that, of course." Vance nodded. "And a list of everyone present at that breakfast you missed. Names, positions, any known, relationships, tense or otherwise." "I'll email it," Vance said. "You'll want the staff names too?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "Anyone who saw or touched the food. And a precise description of the menu." I knew that was coming. "One more thing," Wolfe added, glancing at me. "You will not speak of this visit to anyone. Not your colleagues, your former paramour, or your pet." Vance gave a small smile. "I don't have a pet," Wolfe exhaled. "Good. Pets are difficult to interrogate." With that, Vance stood, shook my hand, and offered Wolfe a curt nod. Then he walked out, as smooth as he'd come in, leaving behind the smell of money and fried egg déjà vu. When the door shut, Wolfe said, "Archie, bring Fritz." I stepped into the hall and called. Fritz came in with the tension of a man being summoned to a murder scene. "Yes, sir?" "The gentleman ate one of your eggs this morning," Wolfe said. Did you prepare it? Fritz nodded. Yes, I made 4 as usual, 3 for you. 1 went untouched. Then this man, this Mr. Vance, entered and ate it before I could stop him. He said he needed to confirm it was real. Wolfe nodded slowly. Then we are being tested. Fritz looked stricken. Monsieur Wolfe, not your fault, Wolfe said, then glanced at me. Archie, make a list. I was already pulling out my notebook. Of? I asked. Anyone, Wolfe said, who knew the importance of eggs. I raised a brow. That list's going to be longer than the IRS tax code. Refine it. Eggs matter only when timed precisely, cooked skillfully, and used strategically. I want those people, and I want them by dinner. That was my cue. I grabbed my coat and hat and headed out into the city, leaving the note, the uneaten yolk, and one very agitated orchid lover behind. By mid-afternoon, I was knee-deep in people, who had motives, manners, and alibis as slippery as an undercooked omelette. Leland Stammer's breakfast table, it turned out, had seated more tension than a family reunion, with a will in the drawer. Vance's email had arrived in Wolfe's inbox around noon, after coaxing Wolfe into letting me read it before he dissected. Like a frog in a high school lab, I printed it out and hit the pavement. 4 names topped the list of attendees, aside from the dearly departed. Each one had reason to be there, and none had reason to love each other. That was good news. In this game, friction was as useful as fingerprints. Here's what the breakfast party looked like. Hilary Voss, Stamer's longtime financial advisor and rumored former flame. A woman with a silk voice and diamond-hard eyes. Wolfe had underlined her name with a red pen. I didn't ask how or why Wolfe selected red, just took it as gospel. Graham Kern, a developer turned investor, turned full-time court jester in luxury menswear, had been pushing Stammer to go in on some sustainable tech campus in upstate New York. Translation: a way to make rich people feel noble while flipping land. Dr. Verena Hall, an ethicist with a soft British accent and a resume longer than her patients, consulted on the moral implications of Stamer's philanthropic projects, also known for writing a scorching editorial about Vance's last business pivot. Will Pritchard, Stamer's personal chef. Young, intense, and just the right amount of mysterious. According to Fritz's network of culinary gossip, yes, there is one, Will had once walked out of a Michelin-starred kitchen mid-service over a disagreement about basil. I started with Hilary Voss, mostly because her office was closest, and because financial advisors tend to keep better office hours than chefs and jilted consultants. Hilary Voss, Park Avenue Precision. She met me in a corner suite above Park Avenue, where the walls were beige and the silence cost more than my monthly rent. She wore a navy dress, pearls, and the kind of smile that looked like it had an exit strategy. I suppose you're here about Leland, she said, motioning for me to sit. You suppose right, I said. You were with him the Tuesday before he died, correct? Breakfast at the estate? She paused. Yes, Graham, Verena, Will, and I. Lennox was supposed to come, but he didn't. He claimed a scheduling error. Why? I shrugged. Just cleaning. Up some inconsistencies. Do you remember what was served? She tilted her head. Frittata, asparagus and goat cheese, fruit, toast, coffee. Will was proud of it. He'd just gotten a new sauce for the cheese. No fried eggs, her brows furrowed. No, not that I recall. Did Leland seem off? Hilary's fingers twitched on her lap. He was distracted, said something cryptic about food being political. I thought he was being theatrical. Anyone upset at the table? She hesitated, then nodded. Verena and Graham had a spat. Philosophical, allegedly. But Leland looked tired. Later I found out he called his attorney that afternoon, wanted to revise his will. Do you know who the change would have benefited? I assumed Lennox. Leland was fond of his mind, if not his morals. Noted, Graham Kern, Smiles and Stainless Steel. Next stop, a downtown co-working palace where the tech elite go to drink kombucha and pretend they're revolutionaries. Graham Kern met me in a room called the Innovation Nook. He wore salmon slacks, no socks, and cologne that suggested bourbon and powdered sugar. "Dude, this whole thing is a tragedy," he said. "Leland was complicated, but he was a legend. Legendary enough to fund your latest venture." He grinned. "Working on it. We were in talks. That breakfast, it was part business, part banter. Lennox bailed, said he was sick, but I figured he was just being Vance. Any tension at the table? Sure, Verena always hated what I represented. She called my last pitch capitalist theater. She wrong? Not entirely, but I was going to get her on board. Leland liked dissent. It made him feel alive. "What did you eat?" He blinked. Frittata, some berries, black coffee, nothing suspicious." "No eggs?" "Only the frittata." Struck. Me as odd that no one mentioned a separate fried egg, yet the threatening note and breakfast clue revolved around one. Something was scrambled here. Dr. Verena Hall, Ethics with Bite Verena, met me in a Cambridge-style coffee shop that somehow existed on the Upper West Side. She wore tweed and radiated a quiet fury. "I assumed this would happen," she said, "before I even opened my mouth. Someone picking apart Leland's last breakfast like it was a sacrament." "You were there," I said. "So was something important." She sniffed. "What matters is this. Leland was paranoid the week he died. Not ill, not frail, paranoid. Said someone had betrayed him." "Betrayed how?" She hesitated. "He didn't say, but I think it had to do with a grant. Lennox wanted to divert funds to a project that didn't exist. Leland found out." "Did anyone else know?" She gave me a tight smile. "I told him. I showed him proof." "Bingo, did you eat fried eggs that morning?" "God, no, I'm vegan and no one else did either, just frittata," which made the egg a phantom. Will Pritchard, the ghost in the kitchen, Will met me after his shift at a private club in Soho. Late 20s, brooding and allergic to small talk. "I cooked the breakfast," he said. "Served it, cleaned it, that's all." "Did you serve fried eggs?" "No, I don't do plated eggs at formal meetings, frittata only." "Did Leland eat?" "Some. Pushed food around, mostly. He wasn't well." "Who looked most uncomfortable that morning?" Verena was irritated. Graham was smug. Hilary kept glancing at her phone, that's all I noticed. And Vance, he smiled for the first time. "Didn't show, but someone asked about him." "Who?" "Leland, right before he bit into the frittata, said, 'Where's the Eggman?' Thought he was joking." "I didn't." Back at the brownstone by 6:45, Wolfe was still in his chair, breathing slow, eyes half-lidded like a python after a warm mouse. "Well?" he said. I gave the report, tight and clean. When I finished, he said nothing for a full minute. Then, pfui. He was not asking about Vance, he was referring to the egg. Something was missing. I blinked. "You think it was supposed to be there?" He nodded. "Yes." "And its absence was a message." "From whom?" Wolfe folded his hands. "That, Archie, is our next step. But first, call Saul Panzer. Tell him I want surveillance on Verena Hall and Will Pritchard. Tonight." "Why them?" "Because the egg," he said, "was not a threat, it was a memory. There's a particular chill that comes with being told by Nero Wolfe to follow someone who's already 3 steps ahead of you. Saul Panzer might be the guy you call when you need results and discretion with the side of genius. But when Wolfe says observe, he doesn't mean check in now and then. He means haunt. Verena Hall and Will Pritchard had been marked." "Why those two?" Wolfe didn't say. "But if you learn anything working for the man, it's this. If he picks 2 people out of a circle, it's not random. It's math." I started with Will Pritchard. Late night hot pan Pritchard clocked out of his private club at 9:15 p.m. and headed east on foot. I tailed him from a discreet distance. trying to stay far enough back to avoid suspicion, but close enough to see if he started dropping clues or breadcrumbs. He didn't. What he did instead was head into a Korean grocery, buy exactly 12 organic brown eggs, and then hop on a northbound subway. I tailed him through 3 transfers and a short walk to a second-story apartment in Astoria. Lights came on. He cracked a window. I saw him boil water. Not suspicious, sure, but the guy had just worked a full chef's shift. Who finishes a night? On their feet with eggs and solitude. I scribbled that down. After 15 minutes of watching him stir something in a pot and sit down at a table by himself, clearly not expecting company, I backed off. Wolfe once told me that solitude is either sanctuary or camouflage. I didn't yet know which one Will was cooking with. Verena Hall, words and wires. The next day I tagged Verena. She was easier to watch, mainly because her routine was tighter than a banker's handshake. Morning run, black coffee, train tour. Columbia, lecture at noon, office hours, then home, no surprises, until Thursday. At 6:43 p.m., Verena broke her pattern. Instead of heading straight home from campus, she took a cab to Midtown and entered a small, unmarked office building. No visible signage, no receptionist, just a security camera and a glass door with a buzz-in system. I didn't get inside. I'm good, but not bulletproof. I did, however, catch a glimpse of a man waiting just inside. Bald, tall, expensive watch. Didn't match any faces from the breakfast party, but I'd seen enough money in my day to know when someone had access to private lawyers or private threats. She was inside for 41 minutes. When she emerged, her posture was stiffer, and she walked like someone whose conscience had either been challenged or cauterized. I followed her home just long enough to confirm she didn't stop or meet anyone else. The moment she got inside, lights went on in exactly 3 rooms: kitchen, study, bedroom. No calls, no guests, just stillness. Wolfe might love stillness, but in a suspect, it means they're either planning or hiding, sometimes both. Back to the brownstone. The report I got back at 8:12 that night. Wolfe was, of course, right where I left him, ensconced in his chair, eyes half shut, the room holding its breath around him. Fritz brought in a tray with beer and cheese. I cracked one open and gave Wolfe the report beat by beat. When I got to the eggs Will had bought, Wolfe opened his eyes. 12, he asked. Yep. Organic, brown-shelled, fridge brand. Not your usual industrial dozen. He paid in cash. Did he eat them? Not that I saw. He cooked something, stirred a pot, maybe soup, 1 pan, no frying, but he looked ritualistic. Like it mattered. Wolfe murmured. Atonement. I waited. As for Dr. Hall, he continued, she met someone. Office building on East 47th. Guy in a suit, clean, high-end, but no ID I could grab without blowing cover. She is afraid, Wolfe said, not of exposure, of consequences. And Will? He's ashamed. Guilt implies action. Shame implies belief. That was classic Wolfe, turning psychology into cartography. But even maps need landmarks, and we still didn't know what the egg had meant, or what Vance had done to make someone leave him a sunny-side-up threat on his stoop. Then Wolfe leaned forward, which in his case is like thunder rumbling in the hills. Archie, call Mr. Vance. Tell him to be here tomorrow at 11 sharp, and bring the frittata. I blinked. The actual frittata? No, Wolfe said, but as close a replica as Fritz can muster. It's time we invited memory to dinner. That was Wolfe's way of saying he was ready to nudge someone into tripping over their own story. Frittata Theatre, Friday morning. At 10:45, the next morning, Vance arrived, looking 10% less slick and 20% more cautious. He wore the same suit, but his tie was new. That's something you only notice if you've been around Wolfe long enough to know that wardrobe repetition is just as revealing as speech. Fritz brought in the food on a tray. Frittata, precise, delicate, and annoyingly photogenic. There was even a small ramekin of fruit and a triangle of dry rye toast on the side. "Smells familiar," Vance said, sitting down. Wolfe ignored the pleasantry. "You lied," Wolfe said. "I'm sure I have, but which time?" Wolfe gestured to the frittata. "That was not what you missed. What you missed was a message. This dish, while competently executed, is not what Stamer intended. He had planned for something different, something personal." Vance went still. "Your note," Wolfe continued, "was not from an accuser. It was from a witness. Someone knew there should have been a fried egg on that plate. Leland Stamer's tradition, 1 fried egg every Tuesday. Same method, same seasoning, always with salt and tarragon." Vance blinked. He never mentioned that." Wolfe leaned back. "Of course he didn't. Because he expected you to know. He wanted you there to see it. The egg was not just a dish, it was a sign, a cue to trust or to test." "But I wasn't there," Vance said quietly. "Exactly," Wolfe said. "So, someone else noticed its absence. Someone who was there and understood the ritual. Someone close. Someone who took the missing egg as proof that something or someone was wrong." Silence. Then Wolfe said, "Will Pritchard knew. He was the one who prepared the breakfast, and I believe he chose not to include the egg." Vance straightened. "Why would he do that?" "To signal you," Wolfe said. "Or perhaps to signal someone else, someone who would recognize the omission. Either way, the act was intentional." Vance stared at the frittata like it might confess. "Someone tampered with that breakfast," Wolfe said, voice low and steady. "Not lethally, at least not that day, but emotionally. Someone betrayed Stamer in a way that made him doubt his circle. And now someone wants me to know I'm vulnerable," Vance said. "That the lie I told matters more than I realized." Wolfe nodded. "It does, because it wasn't just a lie of convenience. It was a gap in the chain. You broke the pattern. The egg was missing because you were missing. And now someone's reminding you of that. Possibly before reminding everyone else." Vance stood slowly. "So what now?" "Now," Wolfe said, "we listen. People who send silent warnings rarely stay silent for long." I watched Vance leave, his steps a shade slower, the lines at his temples deeper. Wolfe didn't speak for another full minute. Then he murmured, "Archie, bring Sol. We're ready for pressure." There's a particular silence that descends on the brownstone when Wolfe is thinking. It's not just quiet, it's layered. The ticking of the old clock gets louder, the orchids seem to breathe, and even Fritz tiptoes like the floorboards have ears. After the breakfast show with Vance and the not-so-innocent frittata, Wolfe had gone into one of his meditative fogs, eyes closed, hands steepled, lips barely moving. I call it the monk pose, though Wolfe would bristle at any association with celibacy. I'd called Saul Panzer that afternoon and briefed him on Wolfe's orders. Expand the net, dig deeper. Wolfe didn't want just eyes on Verena and Will anymore. He wanted timelines, old connections, financial ties, and any sign that someone was pulling strings behind this egg and lie opera. Saul didn't ask why. He just said, "Got it," and hung up. If you ever find a better operative than Saul, check for batteries. The brownstone is breached. That evening I was up in my room going over notes when Fritz rapped at my door. Not loud, not urgent, but odd enough that I opened up mid-knock. "Yes?" I asked. "There's something I want you to see," he said, frowning. I followed him down to the kitchen. Now understand. For Fritz to call me to the kitchen after dinner, and after Wolfe had retired to the plant rooms, was like asking a surgeon to inspect your toaster. He pointed to the spice rack, specifically a jar, tarragon. It was lying flat, not upright, not in line with the rest and not where it should have been. I blinked. "You dusted this earlier?" I asked. "As always," he said. "Wolfe is exact. And this jar, this one, is always aligned with the saffron, between the paprika and the thyme." I bent to look closer. The lid was a hair loose. No visible prints, no disturbance, but the message was there. Someone had touched Wolfe's kitchen. No locks broken. No drawers rifled. Just a single jar, the jar set slightly off kilter. As subtle as a breath on glass, but in this house, it was a scream. I turned and walked straight to the plant rooms. Wolfe was seated under the golden glow of grow lights, coaxing a reluctant Masdevallia into bloom. I didn't knock. "Someone moved the tarragon," I said. His fingers froze over the orchid. "Say that again." "It was laid on its side, cap loose. Fritz didn't do it." He rose, actually rose, and followed me downstairs, inspected the jar, said nothing, then turned and walked slowly into the office, motioning me to follow. When we were both inside, he lowered himself into his chair. "That," he said, "is not trespass, it is possession." I raised a brow. "You think someone wants us to know they were here?" "No," he said. "They want me to know. They understand what the tarragon meant to Stamer. They understand I understand. This is not a warning, it is an invitation." "To what?" "To finish what I started," Wolfe said grimly. "Before they do, enter Saul." The plot. Thickened Saul arrived the next morning, sharp as ever. He looked like an accountant and moved like a pickpocket. "Got what you asked for," he said, handing me a manila folder. "Also, someone's been talking." I opened the folder. It held profiles, financial records, and movement logs for Verena Hall, Will Pritchard, and surprise twist Hilary Voss. "What about her?" I asked. Saul shrugged. "She met someone 3 nights ago. Same office building Verena visited. Same floor. Same man." I whistled. "Connections?" Wolfe asked. "Loosely tied to a trust Stamer funded," Saul said. "The man is Roland Meeks, private legal consultant. Has a history with trust rewrites and quiet disinheritances." Wolfe murmured. "They were all afraid he'd change the—" "Will, more than that," Saul said. "Hilary moved 200 grand from a joint investment account into a private holding 2 days before Stamer died. Quiet, but not quiet enough." "And Will?" Wolfe asked. "Clean. But he was offered a job by Lennox Vance 6 months ago. Turned it down. Why? Unknown. But it lines up with Verena's claim that Vance was diverting funds. Stamer. Found out. Will walked. And now someone wants to clean up the crumbs." Wolfe tapped the armrest. "Once, twice." "Mr. Goodwin," he said at last, "gather them." I blinked. "All of them?" "Yes," he said. "Vance, Hilary, Verena, Graham. Kern will. Tomorrow at 11 here." "Everyone in one room?" I asked. "That's going to cause friction." "I am counting on it," he said. A note in the office. That night I was shutting things down when I saw it. Barely noticeable, tucked under a corner of Wolfe's blotter, a folded scrap of paper. No envelope, no signature. Just a line in thin, black ink. He knew about the egg, but you already knew that. There was a greasy mark on the edge, looked like oil, maybe from a stovetop. I showed Wolfe. He didn't react. Just whispered, "Archie, we're being led, but not by an amateur." Any idea who? He didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the note like it had just offered him a wager. "This will end tomorrow," he said. "Should I call Kramer?" I asked. He hesitated. "Not yet. I may need him, but not until the egg is broken." "Metaphorically?" Wolfe gave me a look. "We must assume nothing." That night I locked every door, checked every latch, and slept with one ear open. We weren't just in a mystery anymore. We were on the board, and someone had made their move. When Nero Wolfe invites 5 suspects to his office for a parlor gathering, it isn't a meeting, it's a trap with central heating. The trick is, you don't tell them it's a trap. You invite, you charm, you nod, and then you watch as they unravel like a wool sweater in a knife fight. It was 5 minutes to 11 the next morning when Fritz opened the front door to the first guest. By 11:05, all 5 were seated in Wolfe's office. Hilary Voss, elegant and unreadable. Graham Kern, bouncing his knee like he was late for a startup pitch. Dr. Verena Hall, polished steel in tweed. Will Pritchard, arms crossed, eyes tracking. Everything. Lennox Vance centre stage as always, with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Wolfe didn't speak right away. He let the silence congeal like bad gravy. "Thank you for coming," he finally said from the safe fortress of his chair. "You have all, in your own way, been part of a lie. A lie born during a breakfast, one that should have included a single fried egg." Graham snorted. "We're doing egg metaphors now?" "No metaphor," Wolfe replied. "A detail, a ritual, a breach, and ultimately, a warning." "I don't follow," Hilary said, arms folded. "You do," Wolfe said calmly. "You're all simply waiting to see who I name." That got their attention. "I should mention," I said casually, "that someone broke into this house 2 nights ago. Didn't steal a thing, didn't ransack, just moved a jar of tarragon, just that." The temperature in the room dropped. "Familiar spice?" I asked Will. He didn't answer. Wolfe didn't need him to. "Leland Stamer," Wolfe said, "was not a sentimental man, but he was habitual. Every Tuesday he insisted on a fried egg, precisely seasoned with salt and tarragon. Mr. Pritchard prepared it faithfully. Until the Tuesday in question." Will shifted. "He didn't want it that day." "No," Wolfe said. "He didn't get it that day. You omitted it. Not because he asked, but because someone told you not to." All eyes swung to Will. He finally spoke. "I left it off because I didn't want to be part of it." "Of what?" Wolfe asked. Will stared at the rug. "Of making it look normal," he said. "Like everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. There it was." Wolfe steepled his fingers. "Explain." Will exhaled. "The night before that breakfast, I saw Hilary and Graham arguing in Leland's study. He wasn't there. They were talking about something being signed too soon, and how he was going to blow it up." "I don't know what he's talking about," Hilary snapped. "I do," Verena said suddenly. "I warned Leland that you and Graham were working together behind his back, using one of his charitable funds to siphon into a side holding. It was sloppy. I gave him the paperwork the night before that breakfast." I turned to Wolfe. "So Stamer found out, got angry, and Will tried to signal something by not giving him his egg?" "No," Wolfe said. "Will knew the egg meant something. It was the first thing Leland always touched. It was his cue. The absence wasn't a protest. It was a flare." Will nodded. "I knew he'd notice, and I hoped someone else would, too. Lennox wasn't there, but he always watched that egg thing like it was a magic trick. I thought maybe he'd get it." Vance looked genuinely rattled for the first time. "You were telling me it wasn't safe," he said softly. "Yeah," Will said. "Too late, I guess." Hilary was flushing crimson now. "That's absurd. There was no danger. Leland had a heart condition." "No, he didn't," Verena said sharply. "He had arrhythmia, monitored, controlled. I was with him at the clinic twice." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Panzer's research turned up something interesting, Ms. Voss. The day after that breakfast, you moved a considerable sum out of a joint fund into a shell company in Delaware." Graham tried to stand. "This is outrageous." "No." Wolfe said, "It's overdue." He turned to Vance. "You lied about where you were. That's forgivable. You withheld it from me. That is not." "You were at your former girlfriend's place?" "Yes," Vance said, recovering. "She's not part of this." "She is," Wolfe said, "because you didn't lie to protect her. You lied because you were in the habit of lying. You were diverting funds from one of Leland's digital ethics projects, and you were caught." "That doesn't make me a killer," Vance snapped. "No," Wolfe said. "It makes you a risk, and someone decided Leland's circle had too many loose threads." Verena stiffened. "You think he was murdered?" Wolfe shook his head. "No. I believe he died naturally, but I believe someone wanted it to look natural, because they feared what would happen if he revised his will." Silence. Then Wolfe said very quietly, "Someone here knew that if Leland lived another day, things would change. The will, the structure, the exposure. So they fed him something, perhaps not toxic, but something that would accelerate his condition. And if not, they were willing to wait. Who? I asked. Wolfe looked at each of them, then settled on one. Hilary Voss, he said. You knew the truth. You moved the money. And you instructed Will to leave out the egg, not to protect him, but to control the narrative. Hilary stood, voice shaking. I had nothing to do with Leland's death. You're right, Wolfe said. You didn't kill him. You just planned your future around it. That landed like a wet gavel. Verena spoke next. So, what happens now? Wolfe looked at me. Call Inspector Kramer. On what grounds? Graham barked. Fraud, misappropriation, witness tampering. You'd be surprised what can be charged when you conspire around a dying man's finances and hide it with herbs. I got up to make the call. As I did, Wolfe leaned back and spoke, mostly to the air. Mr. Stamer may have died of natural causes, but unnatural appetites were at work. And sometimes, he said, reaching for his beer, that's enough. The following morning in the brownstone was about as restful as a fox den in a thunderstorm. While Wolfe stayed rooted in his chair like a granite Buddha, the air in the office crackled with the kind of tension that even our orchids couldn't soften. The previous day's confrontation had done what Wolfe intended. It didn't resolve the mystery. Not completely, but it drew everyone out of their foxholes. Now it was about applying pressure, carefully, selectively, without moving a single muscle more than necessary. Saul Panzer was already on standby for cleanup work. Fritz had been briefed to answer the phone only if it rang 3 times and stoppy, cooking with Tarragon until Wolfe said otherwise. And me, I was in what Wolfe likes to call deployment mode. Translation: keep moving, keep asking, and don't come back without something that can crack the next layer. The objective now wasn't discovery, it was exposure. First, the push on Will Wolfe had one goal with Will Pritchard: shake out the part of his conscience still clinging to silence. So I paid Will a visit at his walk-up in Astoria that morning. He looked like he hadn't slept, which was either guilt or an overcooked conscience. Either way, he let me in. Mr. Wolfe wants you to know something, I said, stepping inside. He's not interested in prosecuting a cook, but he's very interested in what you didn't say yesterday. Will slumped into a kitchen chair. I didn't poison him. Wolfe knows. I just didn't want to be involved, Will muttered. Too late. You were involved. You withheld something. Something. For that matters. He ran a hand through his hair. Hilary came to me 2 days before that breakfast, told me Leland was planning to disinherit her, said he was being manipulated by Vance. She said she needed time, just a few days, to fix it. She asked me to make sure things felt normal at breakfast, but she made it clear I should skip the egg. And you didn't wonder why? I did, he said. That's why I left it off, as a message. To who? He looked at me. To Vance. I knew he'd notice. Well, we'd come full circle there. I left him with Wolfe's advice. Your silence doesn't make you safe. It makes you a tool. Second, the noose around Hilary Wolfe didn't summon Hilary back to the brownstone. That wasn't his style. Instead, he dictated a letter, old school, on his heavy cream stationery. He wrote with the venom of a cat sharpening. Its claws on a silk curtain. Fritz hand-delivered it at noon. Its contents simple. Your recent financial maneuvers and Tuesday's performance suggest a confidence bordering on carelessness. I suggest you reflect on what you truly value before. Further scrutiny is applied by those less discerning than myself. A threat, Wolfe style. Elegant, ambiguous, but loaded with teeth. She didn't respond, but someone else did. Third, the move from Graham Kernat. 3:30 p.m., our doorbell rang. I answered it, and there stood Graham Kern in a linen blazer, too expensive. For someone this nervous, I need to talk to Mr. Wolfe, he said. I stepped aside and let him in. Wolfe didn't stand. He barely acknowledged the man's entrance. "Mr. Kern," Wolfe said, "you are a man of marketing, not strategy. Why are you here?" Graham sat. "Look, I'm not part of this. But Hillary, she's making calls. She's getting ready to push this onto Verena. Said she had dirt, Financial Ethics Board, something from years back." Wolfe let out a breath, long and slow. "She intends to pivot suspicion." "Yeah," Kern said. "She said if Verena cracked, Vance would go with her. And the rest of us would be clear." "She's miscalculating," Wolfe said. "Verena Hall is many things, but fragile is not one of them." I asked, "Why are you here, really?" Kern sighed. "Because I don't want to be collateral damage. I've got 2 investors already asking questions about last quarter's pitch. If this gets messy, I'm radioactive." "Then stop protecting her," Wolfe said. Kern blinked. "I'm not—" "Stop talking, Mr. Kern," Wolfe said, voice rising an inch. "You were complicit. You attended the breakfast knowing funds had been siphoned. You said nothing. You gambled on Leland dying of natural causes. I didn't—" "You did," Wolfe interrupted. "Now you're here because Hillary is about to toss you off the boat. Good, let her. But you'll stay quiet unless I tell you otherwise." Kern swallowed and nodded. Wolfe closed his eyes, signaling the end of the conversation. Kern left quickly. 4th. A signal from Verena that evening around 8:15, Wolfe received a phone call. Unusual in and of itself, Wolfe hates uninvited phone calls the way cats hate water. But this one? He answered before the second ring. It was Verena Hall. "I won't be implicated in their theater," she said. Wolfe said, "Go on." "I've reviewed the documents from last spring. I believe Hillary's initial transfer began long before. She blamed Vance. If you press, I can provide the statements. And your price?" "Truth," she said simply. "And distance. I want my name out of the story before the media gets wind." Wolfe nodded. "Acceptable. Deliver what you have. Tomorrow. 10 sharp." Click, I raised a brow. "That puts the heat directly under Hillary." "Yes," Wolfe murmured. "Let's see what cooks." The final preparations. That night, Wolfe had Fritz prepare a very specific late supper. Fried egg. Single. Salt and tarragon. He stared at it on the plate for a long time before speaking. Leland Stamer understood something few men in his position ever grasp, that small rituals often reveal more than sweeping gestures. That egg was never about food. It was about continuity, predictability, control. And someone used that. "Against him," I said. "No," Wolfe said. "They used it against each other. He merely saw it first." I leaned back in my chair. "So what happens tomorrow?" Wolfe took a sip of beer. "Tomorrow," he said, "I give them what they want." "What's that?" He looked at me with something like amusement. "Closure. Of the wrong kind." At 10:30 sharp the next morning, the brownstone was less a house than a crucible. Wolfe had lit the fuse. All we had to do was stand back and let the pressure rise. By 11, every seat in the office was filled again. No one was smiling. No one cracked a joke, not even Graham, who usually couldn't help himself. Verena Hall sat erect and composed, her handbag on her lap like a legal brief. Will Pritchard had the air of a man walking through fog with both hands in his pockets. Lennox Vance wore a blank face, but his foot tapped just enough to betray him. And Hilary Voss, her composure had the tight sheen of lacquer about to chip. Wolfe began, as always, with courtesy sharpened to a point. "Thank you for coming. I understand. Your time is valuable. So is mine." They murmured half-hearted acknowledgments. Wolfe glanced at me. I nodded. My part was done. Now it was his play. "I have brought you here," Wolfe said, "not because you are all guilty of murder. Leland, Stamer died of natural causes, but the death was leveraged, and so were lies. The question is not who killed Mr. Stamer, but who prepared for his death like an opportunity. No one moved. Wolfe gestured slightly, and I handed him the thin folder Verena Hall had delivered earlier. That morning, financial summaries, time-stamped fund transfers, and the kicker, a memo from Hillary to Roland Meeks, dated 3 days before Stamer's death, outlining potential restructuring of the Stamer Trust. Contingent, of course, on expected revisions. Wolfe opened it but didn't read from it. He didn't have to. This, he said, is what you gambled on, Ms. Voss. You hoped Leland would pass before he could revise his will and remove you. You had already begun the paperwork. Hillary's jaw twitched. That's a stretch. No, Wolfe said. It is strategy. You weren't alone, of course. Mr. Kern was your proxy in the investment pitch, your public ally while you played fiscal chess behind closed doors. And Mr. Vance? Well, he complicated things. Vance raised an eyebrow. You, Mr. Vance, were intended as a distraction. Hillary hoped to redirect Leland's ire at you, not her. The missing money, the suspicious reallocations, they were yours, weren't they? Vance faltered. Not entirely. You planned a shell project, Wolfe said. Something to draw capital away. Make it look like you were siphoning. Hillary helped initiate the structure, but when Verena warned Leland, the tide turned. Leland became unpredictable. Verena spoke up for the first time. He said, I think the house is hollow, and I built it. That was the last thing he said to me before that breakfast. Wolfe gave a small nod. And so Ms. Voss gave one last order to remove the egg. Hillary's face darkened. That's absurd. It is not. Leland's Tuesday egg was not a culinary whim. It was symbolic, predictable. Its absence was a fracture in the ritual, a message. You thought it would make him uneasy, subtly off-kilter. You knew he'd feel it. Will Pritchard shifted uncomfortably. I didn't want to be part of it, he said. You were, Wolfe said, but you defied her in your own way. You omitted the egg, yes, but you told someone, Mr. Vance. Everyone turned to Vance. I figured it out, he said, voice low. The egg was always there. That day, it wasn't. It told me something. Was wrong. Wolfe leaned forward. And then came the note. He gestured again. I pulled out the slip of paper we'd found under Wolfe's blotter, the second note, and read it aloud. He knew about the egg, but you already knew that. Who wrote the note? Verena asked quietly. Wolfe took a long breath. I believe, he said, it was written by Mr. Pritchard, and placed here by him during a second visit to the house. Not to threaten, to confess. All eyes swung to Will. I didn't want it on me, Will said. I knew Hillary's pressure was mounting. I thought if I just left the sign here, someone smarter than me could handle it. You were correct, Wolfe said simply. But that doesn't make her guilty, Hillary snapped, rising. All of this is conjecture. No, Wolfe said calmly, it is deduction. You prepared financially for Leland's death. You manipulated those around him. You directed a private attorney, Mr. Meeks, to draft papers before the death occurred. And you used a minor culinary adjustment to unbalance a man you thought too suspicious. Unbalanced, she said with a scoff. It was an egg. In the right hands, Wolfe said. So is a scalpel. She turned to Vance. You lied about where you were. You set this in motion. Vance rose too. Sure. But I didn't tamper with anyone's legacy. I didn't preemptively restructure a dead man's wealth. I didn't plan a funeral before the death certificate. Wolfe raised a hand. You may all sit, he said. Ms. Voss, I've already sent your documents to Inspector Kramer. You may explain them to him. Hillary didn't sit. She glared. Then she turned and walked out, jaw set like marble. Kern followed, muttering something about reputational recovery. Verena stayed. So did Will. And Vance. Wolfe finally exhaled and turned to Will. You may go. You behaved with restraint, though not with courage. Will nodded. "Thank you," to Verena. "Your discretion will be preserved, as agreed." She dipped her head and left. That left Vance. He looked at Wolfe, then at me. "You knew from the beginning, didn't you, that I wasn't the target?" "No," Wolfe said. "But I knew you weren't the fulcrum. You were merely the excuse." Vance nodded slowly. "And the egg?" Wolfe allowed himself a tight smile. "The egg," he said, "was the truth, undercooked." Vance left without a word. Wolfe sat still for another long moment. "Shall I call Kramer?" I asked. "No need, he's already en route. I sent the files last night." I chuckled. "You never wait for the finale, do you?" "I conduct it," Wolfe said. "There is a difference." Fritz appeared quietly at the door. "Lunch, sir." "Yes," Wolfe said. "And please, today make the egg." "Fried?" Fritz asked. Wolfe nodded once. "Salt tarragon, as it should be. You might think a mystery wraps itself up the moment the big fish swims into the net. But in Wolfe's office, the finale is more surgical than celebratory. It isn't enough to catch someone. You have to lay them out, motive by motive, thread by thread, until there's nothing left but confession or collapse. Wolfe's not in it for the thrill. He's in it for the symmetry. That's why he insisted. I keep everyone's chairs exactly where they had been during the last confrontation. No shifting positions, no changing vantage. The room was set like a crime scene reenactment, because in Wolfe's mind, that's exactly what it was. Kramer arrived a little after 1. He brought the usual attitude and a notepad thicker than his neck. "Okay, Wolfe," he grunted, stepping into the office. "You said this wasn't a murder, but there's a stack of files on my desk that says somebody's been a very bad child." Wolfe gave the barest nod from his chair. "No murder, but considerable maneuvering. You'll find everything in the documentation. The transfers the shell company Hilary Voss established, the timeline of activity before and immediately after Mr. Stamer's death." Kramer dropped into the red chair, still warm from Hilary's exit that morning. "What's your angle?" he asked. "Fraud?" "Fraud," Wolfe agreed. "And, I suspect, conspiracy to manipulate a will, though the latter may be more difficult to prove in court." Kramer flipped through the top few pages of Wolfe's dossier, grunted again, and looked up. "Give me the short version." That was my cue. Wolfe prefers his reveals with an audience, and Kramer, crusty though he may be, is as real an audience as you get. "Hilary Voss," I said, "was the closest thing Stamer had to a business partner. She was also the most likely to be cut out of his estate once he found out she'd teamed with Graham Kern on a shady investment. She got tipped off, probably by Roland Meeks, that Stamer was talking to a new attorney." "She saw the writing on the will," Kramer muttered. "Exactly," I said. "So she started putting a backup plan in motion, shifted funds, created a narrative where Vance looked like the bad actor, even looped in Will Pritchard, unofficially, to destabilize Stamer during their regular Tuesday breakfast." Kramer looked up. "The egg." Wolfe opened his eyes just a touch. "Indeed," he said. "The egg." Kramer huffed. "You're telling me this whole thing hinges on breakfast?" Wolfe tilted his head slightly. "Not breakfast. Pattern." Mr. Stamer was a creature of habit. His egg every Tuesday was not negotiable. Its absence told him something was off. Someone took that anchor from him. That small disruption made him suspicious, perhaps even agitated enough to push for changes, faster than he already planned. "And then he dropped dead," Kramer said. "Of natural causes," Wolfe said. "But someone, Ms. Voss, made sure the timing suited her needs. She didn't kill him. She merely cleared the decks for what she expected to be a sudden opportunity." Kramer tapped a pencil on the folder. "Okay, so what happens now?" Wolfe gave a slight nod in my direction. I pulled a sheet from the folder, Verena Hall's financial exhibit, a ledger of small but strategic withdrawals by Hilary, funneled into what appeared to be a long-defunct consulting entity tied to Kern. "She'll say it was a dormant partnership," I said. "But the money moved just days before the death. That's motive and motion." "And Vance?" Kramer asked. He lied about his whereabouts, Wolfe said, but only to avoid a separate scandal. He was used, made to appear as the likely leech. Verena Hall knew the truth. She told Stammer. That ultimately doomed the plan, until he died anyway. Yes, Wolfe said. And the others, Kern, Vance, even Will, they scrambled to look less guilty. Verena kept her mouth shut. Will sent a warning, and Vance received it too late. Kramer stood. I'll bring Voss in. If even half of this sticks, she's looking at a boatload of white-collar charges. Wolfe simply nodded as if accepting the inevitable settling of dust. Kramer tucked the file under his arm and looked around the office like he might find more suspects hiding under the rug. Then he turned to go. You're sure he wasn't poisoned? He asked halfway out the door. I'm sure, Wolfe said, but if you ask me, death by egg omission is no less revealing. The debrief after Kramer left. Wolfe didn't speak for several minutes. I poured him a glass of beer, set it by his elbow and waited. At last he said, The criminal mind is rarely theatrical, it is practical, but it dresses itself in small flourishes. I raised a brow. Like skipping a fried egg. He nodded. Miss Voss believed that by subtly shifting Leland's routine, she could create unease without suspicion. She was wrong, he noticed, and so did others. Do you think he suspected her? Wolfe was silent then. Perhaps, but he lacked time. Even brilliant men must yield to the calendar. I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands behind my head. Still, I said, you've got to admit that's the first time we've solved a case where the primary clue came out of a frying pan. Wolfe gave me a withering glance. Phui. It was never about the egg. It was about who missed it, who used it, and who pretended not to care. I grinned. You going to write that down somewhere? No, he said, but I expect you will. He stood, which meant only one thing. The mystery was concluded. The world, according to Wolfe, had returned to its proper axis. Dinner? I asked. Fritz is preparing duck, he said, with citrus glaze, but he will begin, of course, with eggs, one each, fried, he nodded once, as they should be. And with that, he stepped into the dining room, leaving behind the cleaned-up case of a man who died naturally, and the unnatural appetites that circled his memory like vultures. If you'd walked into the brownstone that evening without knowing, the week we'd just had, you might have thought we were exactly what we pretended to be. Two men of leisure living in a house run like a museum, eating duck à l'orange under warm lights while the outside world hummed along, oblivious. But I knew better. Behind the quiet clink of silver and the waft of citrus glaze, there was something weightier in the air. Wolfe was chewing, slowly, methodically, like a man who hadn't just helped expose a high-level financial con built on lies, omissions, and the tactical withdrawal of a single fried egg. His silence wasn't brooding. It was digestion, in every sense of the word. Fritz had prepared the meal with unusual care, as if the kitchen itself needed to be restored after its symbolic desecration. The eggs, one each, were perfect. Golden, firm-edged, seasoned with Wolfe's sacred blend of sea salt and fresh tarragon. Not flamboyant, not flashy, just right. I finished mine and leaned back, letting the duck settle. Wolfe had barely spoken since Kramer left with his manila folder and his burden of forthcoming indictments. So I broke the quiet the only way I knew how. You ever think about how this one would have gone if Will had served the egg? Wolfe paused mid-chew, then set down his fork. Yes, he said. It would have gone unnoticed. Stammer would have finished the meal. Voss and Kern would have continued unchallenged. The revisions to the will might still have come, but with more subtlety and more delay. I nodded. So Will cracked the case before we even knew there was one. Hardly, Wolfe said, sipping his beer. He disrupted the narrative. That is not solving. That is resisting, I smirked. Funny, I always figured you liked disruption. I like truth, he replied. Disruption is often noisy and incoherent. But truth is composed. It sits in a chair and waits. Just like you, I said, tapping the rim of my glass. He frowned, though not deeply. And Vance? I asked. Wolfe shook his head slowly. A fool. Talented. Perceptive. But too indulgent. He knew he was being manipulated, yet he still played his part. To protect his pride? Precisely, Wolfe said. As did Kern and Voss. Even Verena, though hers was the pride of clarity. She played her cards close, I said. She understood the game better than most, Wolfe replied, which is why she will survive this with fewer bruises. And Will? I asked, not without curiosity. Mr. Pritchard will cook again, Wolfe said simply. Perhaps not immediately, but men who express conscience through their craft usually find their way back. That was as close to praise as I'd ever heard him give a civilian. We finished dinner in silence. As Fritz cleared the plates, I brought in coffee. Wolfe declined dessert, not out of mood, but ritual. When the game ends, he likes stillness, a clean stage, no curtain call. I walked with him into the office, more out of habit than necessity. The familiar hush fell over the room as Wolfe returned to his chair. The leather gave its usual creak. I took my place across from him, the fire casting soft shadows across the bookshelves and the orchid trays. Funny thing, I said, leaning back, how no one actually killed Leland Stamer. Not directly, but everyone tried to live off his ending. Wolfe's eyes didn't open, but he replied, because a man's death is often more useful than his life, especially when the living believe they've been wronged. I nodded. So, what this was all about legacy, money? Power, Wolfe said. Power to rewrite a life, to control how it ends, how it is remembered. Miss Voss thought she could rewrite Mr. Stamer's story quietly, and she might have succeeded. If not for the egg. If not for pattern, he said. One unbroken line disturbed. A Tuesday. Ritual shattered. Mr. Stamer built his world on habit. Miss Voss bet that no one would notice when it cracked, but someone always notices. I couldn't help but chuckle. You do love your symbols. He opened one eye. I love what they conceal. We sat a moment longer. I could hear the quiet hiss of Fritz in the kitchen, washing the remains of the case off our plates. The house, violated just days ago, now felt returned to its sacred state. You ever think, Wolfe, I said, that we don't get justice so much as narrative balance? He considered. Justice, he said, is often impossible, but clarity is always within reach. And that is enough. That landed. He reached for the book resting on the table beside him. A leather-bound culinary, memoir written by a chef I'd once seen scream at a waiter for mispronouncing coquilles. Wolfe opened to a ribbon-marked page. I stood. I'll be upstairs, I said. Don't stay up too long admiring your own genius. I never do, he said. I paused at the door. But you are going to write this one down, right? I asked. He looked over the rim of his glasses. No, you will. I grinned. Yeah, I thought so. Then I left him in peace. Postscript, they charged Hilary Voss with 3 counts of fraud, attempted fiduciary manipulation, and conspiracy to exploit a pending estate. Graham Kern avoided formal charges, but became persona non grata in venture capital circles. Vance slunk, back into digital exile, probably reinventing himself somewhere with a new name and a podcast. Verena published a book on moral courage 2 months later. It sold well. Will Pritchard took a sabbatical. Last I heard, he was running a pop-up in Vermont called One Egg, serving breakfast all day. As for the brownstone, it's back to normal. Orchids bloom. Fritz cooks. Wolfe reads. I file reports and swat away incoming cases Wolfe would rather ignore. But every Tuesday, without fail, Fritz serves 1 perfectly fried egg, seasoned with salt and tarragon. Just 1, and Wolfe always eats it first. There's a peculiar kind of quiet that settles over the brownstone when a case ends. It's not relief exactly. Wolfe doesn't do relief. It's more like the world righting itself after being tilted too long. Chairs back in place, books reshelved, coffee cups rinsed and lined up like soldiers. The air thickens with order. With Wolfe's brand of justice, which isn't always what the courts hand down, but it's always what the truth demands. A few days had passed since Kramer took Hilary Voss in. The papers had already started sniffing around, but they didn't have the full picture. Just a headline about a trust advisor under investigation for misappropriating assets. That was fine by Wolfe. He doesn't care for headlines unless they're printed on heavy cream stock and addressed directly to him. As for the rest, Graham Kern ghosted his own startup pitch in Miami and was last seen at a beachside hotel, probably drafting an apology to investors on the back of a room service menu. Lennox Vance sent Wolfe a brief email, a single sentence. "You were right. I missed the egg." Wolfe didn't reply, not because he held a grudge, but because Vance already had what he needed, clarity wrapped in tarragon. Will Pritchard wrote a thank you note, handwritten even, said he was moving north to cook in peace. Wolfe pinned it to the board in the kitchen. Fritz pretended not to notice, but he was whistling a bit more than usual when he whipped up Tuesday's eggs. As for Verena Hall, she gave 2 guest lectures and then vanished back into academia. We never heard from her again, and that suited us just fine. But this isn't about them. Not really. The final scene, as always, belonged to Wolfe, a Tuesday as it should be. I was sitting at my desk, organizing notes from the case into something vaguely resembling logic, when Fritz entered with a tray. It carried 1 plate, 1 egg, fried, golden-edged, resting on warm rye toast. Salt and tarragon applied in a measured dusting, Wolfe himself had once described as civilized restraint. Fritz placed the plate gently on Wolfe's desk and withdrew. Wolfe looked down at the egg for a moment before lifting his fork. I broke the silence. "That one for Stamer?" He didn't answer right away. "It is for me," he said finally. "But, yes, it is also for him." I sipped my coffee. "Think he'd be satisfied with how it all ended?" "No," Wolfe said. "He would regret the necessity." That landed. Wolfe never sentimentalizes the dead, but this was as close as he'd come to eulogy. "And you?" I asked. He chewed, swallowed, dabbed at his mouth. "I regret," he said, slowly, "that so many of the living believe death is a door to escape consequence." I blinked. "You think Hilary thought she'd get away with it?" "She did get away with it," he said. "For a while. Most people do. But truth does not measure time the way guilt does. It simply waits." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "You think it would have gone differently if Vance had shown up that morning?" Wolfe gave a thin smile. "No, it would have gone differently. If he'd told the truth after he didn't." I laughed under my breath. "We got there anyway." He raised a brow. "You did. Without the egg we may not have." That was high praise, Wolfe style. Not directly to me, but to the case itself, to the unassuming clue that broke the facade. I stood and stretched. "So, that's it. A man died. A will almost got rewritten by thieves in tailored suits, and we got paid to defend the honor of a breakfast item." "Pfui," Wolfe said. "We defended a principle." "Eggs can be both," I said. He didn't argue. I made my way toward the door, then stopped and turned. "Hey, Wolfe, what was it you said earlier, about small flourishes?" He looked up. "Criminal minds dress themselves in them." I nodded. "You ever worry we'll miss one?" His eyes narrowed just slightly. "No," he said. "You never miss breakfast," and with that he returned to his egg.